Good day, familia. This is your host, Rafael Collazo. You're watching and listening to The Collazo Show. The Collazo Show and The Collazo Show podcast provides news, analysis, commentary at the intersection of leadership, politics, and cultura. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe to The Collazo Show. There's a couple places you should be watching it, should be sharing, listening, reviewing, rating, blah, blah, blah. On Substack, where it gets released first, and then on our YouTube page at The Collazo Show. And again, you can also watch and listen to us on the Collazo Show podcast, which you can listen to, subscribe, download, share, review, rate, let everybody know what's popping. Anywhere you can now listen to a podcast. Later on in the show, we'll discuss the results of the Illinois primary. Teaches us a lot about kind of where we're at in our monitoring politics. I've got some interesting tidbits from the perspective of the Latino vote in Illinois on Tuesday. I have another Senate race. I want y'all to keep it out. I got a little sneak preview for that. And in the Cultura segment, wow, everyone figured out the World Baseball Classic's pretty cool. And we'll have a reflection on that. And shout out to Latina making moves in the sports world. But first, familia, I mean, I couldn't let the week go by without addressing the Cesar Chavez situation. I mean, I think the first thing that just came to my heart was damn. You know? I mean, Cesar Chavez, we didn't see it. You know, there was an expose in the New York Times a couple days ago, and subsequently Dolores Huerta, the iconic civil rights leader, has been doing interviews, sharing her part of the story, which laid out some very credible allegations from both a few women that accused Cesar Chavez of, basically sexual assault and rape as small children, as tweens. And Dolores Huerta shared her story that she, through two different sexual assaults, had two children with Cesar Chavez. Just really, appalling, disgusting, heartbreaking stuff. And, I know that our hearts are heavy across the spectrum, and people that care about civil rights and people that care about the Latino community and the farm worker movement and have lived their lives, like so many of us, to honor the legacy of pioneers, elders, and civil rights champions like Cesar Chavez. I mean, the closest thing to Hispanics have to a Martin Luther King type figure in our community. And, especially in my work and in my network, it's just been heartbreaking and shocking, or maybe not so shocking. I wanted to read a statement which I think sums up a lot of the emotions and a lot of the sentiment of the Latino community leadership class from my organization, Unidos US. This was the press statement that Unidos US, the nation's largest Hispanic civil rights organization, shared the afternoon of the stories coming out a few days ago. Unidos US's reaction to the allegations made against Cesar Chavez in a report today by the New York Times. Quote, "We are shocked and appalled by the extremely disturbing allegations made against Cesar Chavez. Our thoughts are with all the victims, whether they were named or unnamed in this report. Their stories must be taken seriously, and the victims need to be treated with the utmost dignity and respect." Quote, "This is a profoundly sad and devastating moment for our community and for everyone who admired and took inspiration from Chavez's life and work. We want to commend and express support for our affiliates, the Cesar Chavez Foundation." We got a lot of good fam. I mean, I'm heartbroken for those folks, good people. En la Unión del Pueblo Entero, Lupe, and our longtime partners, the United Farm Workers, also great friends, great allies, for taking swift and constructive action to focus on and provide mental health and other assistance to victims in the face of these allegations. We must reaffirm that no one, no matter how revered, is above the law. As such, we call for these allegations to be thoroughly investigated and a confirmed justice must be served. Quote, "Unidos US stands with the victims as we continue to fight for dignity and justice in the civil rights of the Latino community in the United States." I think that I think that was really well said, not just because I work there, because I just think it was really, really well done. And I think it set the pitch, and the sentiment, and the attitude that we all need to have in the midst of this, heartbreaking moment in our history. I think the first piece is we have to make it very clear as Latino leaders from a political perspective, from a social perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, from a cultural perspective. We're going to have zero tolerance for rape, sexual assault, pedophilia in our community. And, there's been conversations that have happened about, not to excuse Cesar Chavez's alleged behavior, but the references to how that may have been more socially acceptable in that time period. Well, regardless of that, it's not socially acceptable now. And we have to make sure that, that's made clear. It made clear it wasn't, if anyone thought it was acceptable then, they were wrong. And that we have to make very clear from a community perspective, especially I think in these sort of issues related to sexual assault, domestic violence, and, other attacks on women and young and girls, that the men in our community have to stand up and say there's zero tolerance for all that. That's all just nonsense. And you have to be held accountable. I think the other piece of that related is, that's what the community expects right now. That we expect and deserve leaders that protect and defend the most vulnerable, which unfortunately oftentimes are our children, in this case, young girls. It's so freaking disgusting. And even, unfortunately, too oftentimes adult women, in the case of Dolores Huerta, who not only was dealing with these issues of rape and sexual assault at her workplace, and even more tragically, within the social justice movement of the time. We have to be consistent. We cannot, as leaders, in this case, Hispanic leaders, who are pushing back vociferously against the Trump administration and vociferously against the treatment of our communities through ICE enforcement, through corruption, through taking away our health care, through the Epstein files, and try to hold this administration accountable for things like the Epstein files and the credible allegations that are all within those files, including referencing the president himself, and not be consistent about this one. So the strength that we've come out, I think, is very commendable. And, it doesn't, and I appreciate what our statement from the U.S. and the work that's being done by the California legislature to move to change the name of the state holiday, Cesar Chavez Day, following these allegations, and they're moving to change it to Farm Worker Day. Our great friend in Charlotte, North Carolina, unfortunately had coming up March 30th, a Cesar Chavez breakfast. From our great friend, Pat Martinez, the founder of the National Council for Leadership, has announced that they're going to change that breakfast, which honors some incredible leaders and Latino leaders in the Carolinas who had nothing to do with, Cesar Chavez's behavior decades ago, and deserve to be honored and deserve to be able to, that legacy. They are now calling that breakfast the annual contemplation breakfast. So much respect to Pat Martinez for taking swift, bold, and decisive leadership. And our friends in the both Assembly Speaker Robert Rivas in California and California Senate Pro Tem President Monique Limon for taking that bold action to change the name of, says they're moving it quickly through the legislature as it happens before the day next week to name Cesar Chavez Day, change it to Farm Worker Day, because at the end of the day, as it says in the U.S. statement and many of these other statements you're seeing from leaders across our community, is that one person's, in this case, utter failures, horrific behavior, still doesn't take away from the collective work that's been done by the farm worker movement on behalf of farm workers, laborers, and Latino civil rights. And regardless of these shocking revelations, it gives us an opportunity to really reflect on how oftentimes we look to one singular Masonic leader for guidance and help to get us out of the wilderness. And obviously, charismatic leaders are important. But ultimately, none of this gets done with one person or even a small group of people or a few iconic leaders. It's about a collective. And so this gives us in this really sad moment, because it's really sad. It's really sad, heartbreaking. I was just with the Cesar Chavez Foundation folks in Chicago a few months ago and talking about how they were gearing up for his 100th birthday celebrations in a year or two. And those folks, had nothing to do with this, and are real hardworking people that really are the children and grandchildren of that generation, the farm worker movement generation of the 60s and 70s, carrying on that legacy in a very respectful way. And I know I can only imagine what they're going through right now. But regardless, it's about the collective. It's about all of us. And what we're going to continue to do to put Cesar Chavez's legacy in proper perspective moving forward, make it very clear that one person's actions are not a reflection of an entire community or entire movement, and that we're going to move forward and not only hold, in this case, to the extent we can, in reality, because he's passed away many years ago, Cesar Chavez accountable, shed light on what's taking place, support Dolores Huerta and the other victims through this time, which is very difficult. These women hold on to this for decades in their lives. I mean, Dolores Huerta is 96 years old. What an incredible burden to carry on all these years. And to hopefully this opens up space for us to provide more support for victims of sexual assault, rape, pedophilia, and violence in our community. And so we have to stand with victims. We have to stand with the vulnerable. We have to understand that there's no tolerance, regardless of other positive things you may have done in your life, for this sort of behavior in our community. It starts with us, fam. We have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to be there for each other more than ever. So I appreciate the work that's been done across the country to address this moment. And we pray for the victims, not just in this case, but there's just too many, unfortunately, especially women, not all, but especially women that have dealt with these horrific situations and been victimized in this way. We hope that they find the courage to seek out support, and they have a welcomed audience to support them for healing and for accountability. And it's just sad, fam. It's just really sad. And there's almost like a mourning period we have to go through, because it really does set you back. And respect and a continued admiration for and support for these women, and for people that are responding the way they should be, from the California legislature to numerous organizations across the country, and leaders that understand that regardless of what Cesar Chavez did for our community and farm workers and working people and the labor movement, and all the good things he did, that kind of behavior cannot be tolerated and accepted. Thank you so much for watching the Collazo Show. I want to get into the political stuff real quick. Illinois. So Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton won, I think a little more convincingly than people thought, won the Senate primary nomination, and Illinois is very blue. She will be the next senator representing the great state of Illinois. She beat Congressman Christian Morphy by 7%, which was a little bit more of a victory than I think people expected. So much respect to Lieutenant Governor Stratton. I think from a political perspective, not only a great victory for her, but a great victory for Governor J.B. Pritzker, who endorsed his lieutenant governor and really invested a lot of political capital and a lot of capital into supporting what will now be the third Black woman that would be in the U.S. Senate, and I think only the sixth ever. So definitely historic, and shows the local political strength of Governor Pritzker, who has a pretty nominal reelection fight in November. And then I did want to dig in, because I wanted to share with people, this does speak to the conversation about, will Democratic voters, based off the results of the Texas primary election between Jasmine Crockett and Tallarico, which Representative Crockett lost. There was a conversation about, will Democratic voters, after Harris's loss in 2024, Crockett's loss in this Democratic primary in Texas, are Democratic voters straying away from in a troubling way from Black women to vote for them, to vote for Black female candidates. And so this is a case where, in Illinois, where not only did they vote 40% for Lieutenant Governor Stratton, but Congresswoman Kelly, another Black woman that got endorsed, who was the Congressional Black Caucus candidate, received a pretty strong showing, about 17%. So, two-thirds, the vast majority of voters, black, in this case, voted for a black female. And so I wanted to look into the Latino vote numbers. And so I got some intel that did some research that Lieutenant Governor Stratton's strongest ward in Chicago, 50 wards in the Chi, Ward 22 in the South Side, wonderful part of the city, the biggest Latino ward in the city, was her biggest, was the most supportive ward that she had in the entire city. So Lieutenant Governor Stratton got 54% of the vote in Ward 22 in the South Side of Chicago, in the heart of the Mexican Latino community. And she not only got 54% of the vote, she beat Congressman Christian Murphy in that congressional district by a very wide margin, 35%, as opposed to 7% in the entire population. So a huge victory for Lieutenant Stratton in the stronghold of Latino politics in Southside Chicago. It shows the power of the outgoing Congressman Chuy Garcia's political operation. It shows the strength, of course, of Alderman Michael Rodriguez, the local political leader there. And it also shows that obviously Latino voters were not only responsive to the Lieutenant Governor's message and track record, particularly her very strong defense of the immigrant population against the ICE incursions in Illinois over this past year or so, but also shows that the Latinos didn't have any concerns about the Lieutenant Governor's either approach to governing or her style, but also, you could argue didn't have the same electability concerns because, presumably she'll win in November. The Democratic nominee was going to most likely certainly win in November in a much more very blue state in Illinois as compared to a red state like Texas. So, how much of it was their individual, either, Stratton versus like a Crockett, their individual approach to campaigning in the Latino community, how much of it was how the electability factor, how much of it was their opponent's approach to an engagement in the Latino community. It's hard to tell. Obviously, it helps when you have someone like Governor Pritzker that got your back and some of the bankroll he got and political support. And obviously, Congressman Garcia in the South Side is a very strong political ally to have. But it tells we could take lessons, concerns, their issues, their ideological preferences, their candidate preferences from Latino voters in Illinois as much as you could take away from the electoral results in Texas. So even though they tell very different stories, but they're both two mirrors and insights into the Latino vote throughout the country. The other piece I wanted to mention, I saw a very interesting poll. Colorado has a Senate primary race, so Democratic primary race coming up in June between current Senator John Hickenlooper, and who's a Philly guy, by the way, and Colorado State Senator Julie Gonzalez. So the Working Family Party in Colorado released a very interesting poll that in the initial polling, when you ask Latino voters or you ask voters in Colorado who they prefer, not just Latino voters, actually, Democratic voters that would vote in a June, presumably would be voting in a June primary in Colorado, who they prefer. The initial question, Senator Hickenlooper was very dominant, 45-17 over State Senator Gonzalez. When you then present and inform Democratic voters in Colorado, and present neutral, neutral and positive biographical information about Senator Hickenlooper and State Senator Gonzalez, it gets a lot tighter. So after they gave people some initial set of information in the polling, Hickenlooper is still up 38%, but State Senator Julie Gonzalez shoots up, doubles her support to 35%. And that's within the margin of error. So, it's very interesting. And I predict that that's still going to be a competitive race. So what this indicates is that if State Senator Gonzalez in Colorado can get her message out there, and obviously fundraising is a big part of that, organization is a big part of that, media coverage is a big part of that. If she can get her message out to the Democratic primary elected in Colorado, she's got a real shot. So very interesting. Keep your eye out for Colorado. A lot going on out there. We also got our homie Manny Rutinel, State Representative Manny Rutinel, running in Colorado 8 in Northern Colorado, and that's at a House primary election. And so we're going to have Manny on the show. That's our guy. And so Dominicano, we have a Dominican congressman in Colorado fan. Very exciting stuff. In the Cultura segment, the World Baseball Classic concluded earlier this week. Congrats to Team Venezuela, La Vino Tinto. Much respect to them. Fantastic team, good guys. And the Venezuela community certainly could use, something to be happy about. And there's lots to discuss about, U.S. Team USA and what happened on the field and some of and there's a lot of conversation about the stylistic impact on baseball in comparison to what's happened to the style of kind of staler style of Major League Baseball. But, the big story here is how popular this thing has gotten. 10.8 million viewers watched the World Baseball Classic final. That is more viewers than 6 of the 7 NBA finals games. I mean, that's humongous. Attendance is more than doubled for this entire tournament globally. And it's further proof that Latinos in diversity, whether it's in this case in the sporting world, is not like the future. It's right now. And in this case, if baseball wants to continue to grow and build on this momentum that they've gotten over the last few years, they need to take a big lesson from this moment. They need to take a big lesson from Bad Bunny's appearance at the Super Bowl, which I still say historically will be the most historically important halftime show of all times. And understand that investing and supporting and embracing the Latino community, and not just our market, but our fiebre, our culture, our energy, our social. I mean, look at all that Venezuelan baddie social media stuff. I mean, this is bringing so much avenues for, in this case, Latinos to grow the game, engaging the Latino community. And, corporate America is not stupid. Young Nico is doing the Gap commercials. You saw that Puerto Rican reggaeton mega producer, Bad Bunny's primary producer, Tiny, did like a little mini soundtrack for the World Baseball Classic with Young Nico and Mike Towers and some other artists. So, I think they're starting to get it. They're starting to see that this is not the future in some hypothetical. And it also shows that you literally can send out. Think about this, familia. They're literally sending a paramilitary force to harass us, intimidate us, arrest us, abuse us, throw us in concentration camps. And they still can't stop us. Because they ain't going to stop us. We ain't going nowhere. Because you know what? We're home. We ain't going nowhere. Much respect to our fam in the World Baseball Classic. And I want to shout out this young lady. I became a wrestling dad this year. My oldest son, much respect to Troy, wrestled. And it was so much fun. Me and my wife had so much fun being wrestling parents. It was a fantastic experience. And we look forward to next year. And so I got into this college wrestling stuff. And this is the first year, apparently, that the NCAA tournament, the NCAA did a full women's wrestling tournament for the lady grapplers. And I got to shout out this young lady. I watched her championship match. Audrey Jimenez from Lehigh University, not too far from where I'm doing this recording right now, became the national women's college wrestling champion, NCAA champion, at the 110-pound weight division. Much respect to Audrey Jimenez. I was just in touch with our friends in the Lehigh Valley, where Lehigh University is located. The Latino community is very excited, very proud of her. She's a Latina from Arizona, so much respect to Audrey, and much respect to all our grapplers out there, people involved in the great sport of wrestling, whether they're men or women. It's a fantastic sport. And a lot of Latinos, a very diverse sport. A lot of Latinos, both men and women out there doing their thing. But Audrey Jimenez, our champion from the Lehigh Valley, leading the way. Thank you all so much for joining. This episode, this introspective episode of the Collazo Show. Continue to subscribe, support. I really appreciate it, familia, the love and support. People reaching out to and they're listening when they drive to work. They're sharing this. They really enjoyed a lot of the conversations. They love the Salceros really love the conversation with my father, the original Collazo, had a birthday this week. We're going to have some exciting guests next week. Look out for that. And, Cesar Chavez thing, it's really bad. But through that, we have to show our character and we have to show our consistency, and we have to continue, because we really have step up in this really dark moment in our community's history. Not only to stand up for the victims, But really make this an opportunity to really raise our voices around how this abuse too oftentimes happens in the shadows, needs to stop. And we need to, because there's so much pain in our community that we need to um, ameliorate. Thank you all so much for joining the Collazo Show, and have a wonderful day.